1 year had passed since High Hegemon Wraithel stood before his own people and delivered an apology. It had not been the carefully worded, diplomatic statement his advisors had prepared, full of qualifications and redirections that would have allowed him to save face while saying nothing of substance. The humans had rejected that version. They had rejected the second version too. And the third, in the end, Wraithel had stood before cameras broadcasting to every corner of the galaxy and admitted, in plain language, that the Korvathi hegemony had deliberately interfered with human interests for nearly 2 decades. He had named the dead, all 300, and 12 of them he had listed the incidents all, 73 of them, and he had accepted full responsibility on behalf of his government and his people. The reparations had been paid in full within 60 days. Korvathi ships now gave human vessels twice the required clearance distance when passing in shared space, and Representative Threlvex had quietly retired from public life after receiving death threats from his own species, who blamed him for humiliating their civilization before the entire Galaxy. Ambassador Yun Sioha had returned to her duties at the Galactic Council, and she was as patient and polite as she had ever been. But the other species watched her differently now when she smiled at a subtle insult. They no longer saw weakness. They saw restraint, deliberate and chosen. And they wondered what it would take to make her stop smiling again. Dokkarin, the Korvathi military strategist who had tried to warn his people before the crisis, had been appointed as the Korvathi liaison to humanity. It was considered either a great honor or a great punishment depending on who was asked. He had spent the past year studying humans more closely than ever, meeting with their diplomats and military officers and ordinary citizens, trying to understand what made them so different from every other species in the galaxy. Tonight he sat in a small bar on Harmony Prime, sharing drinks with Security Chief Kira Menjay. "I have a question," he said. And the alcohol had loosened his tongue enough to ask something he had wondered for months. Kira raised an eyebrow. "Ask. Did you enjoy it?" Dokkarin said. "The victory, I mean. And watching my people humiliated before the galaxy." Kira was quiet for a long moment. "No," she finally said, and there was something sad in her voice. "We did not enjoy any of it." "Then why?" "Because we had to." Dokkarin made a sound of confusion. "You had other options. And you could have continued negotiating, continued waiting, continued hoping that things would change on their own." "We could have," Kira agreed. "And nothing would have changed, and more of our people would have died. And eventually, we would have been pushed so far that our only options were surrender or war." She took a drink and continued. "What we did was not about enjoying victory or punishing your people. And it was about reaching the point where avoiding conflict required more energy than ending it. I do not understand. Humans will forgive almost anything," Kira said. "We will absorb insults and endure setbacks and extend patience beyond any reasonable measure. And we do this because we genuinely believe that peace is better than war, that cooperation is better than conflict, that the universe is big enough for everyone. But there is a limit. There is always a limit," she confirmed. "And when we reach it, we do not fight out of anger or hatred or a desire for revenge. And we fight because continuing to not fight has become impossible." Dokkarin considered this for a long moment. "That is perhaps more frightening than if you simply enjoyed violence." "Perhaps," Kira said with a small smile. "But it is also why we stop when the problem is solved. And we do not keep fighting just because we can. And we do not try to conquer or humiliate beyond what is necessary to ensure the situation does not repeat. You could have destroyed us, yes, but you chose not to. We chose to stop when stopping became possible," Kira said. "Your hegemon apologized, and he paid the reparations, and he acknowledged what was done. And that was enough. That was enough. We did not want your destruction," she said. We wanted your respect, and we wanted the deaths of our people acknowledged. And we wanted to be left alone to pursue our own future without interference. And now we have those things," Kira said. "And we can go back to being patient and cooperative and optimistic. Because that is who we are when we are allowed to be, on the other side of the station." Counselor Jess addressed a gathering of young diplomats from a dozen species. They had asked her to speak about what she had learned from 50 years of observing humanity. And she had agreed because the lesson was too important not to share. "When I was young," she began, "I believed that the galaxy was divided into predators and prey, into strong species and weak species, into those who conquered and those who submitted." The young diplomats listened with the eager attention of those who still believed they understood how the universe worked. Humans did not fit into this understanding. Jess continued, "They were soft and emotional and seemed to lack the basic instincts for survival that every successful species possessed." I was wrong. She let the words settle before continuing. "Humans are not prey animals pretending to be predators," she said. "They are something else entirely, something that our categories do not account for. And they are a species that chooses to be peaceful while possessing the full capacity for devastating violence. The difference is crucial. A prey animal runs from danger because it cannot fight. A weak species submits to a stronger one because it has no alternative. Humans choose peace because they believe it is better, not because they are incapable of war. And when they stop choosing peace, the galaxy should be very, very concerned." She looked at each of the young faces before her. "You will encounter humans throughout your careers," she said. "You will find them friendly and cooperative, and endlessly willing to talk and negotiate and compromise. Do not mistake this for weakness. Do not assume that their patience is unlimited, and never, ever push them past the point where they stop smiling." In her office on Earth, Chancellor Don Haijin reviewed reports from across human space. Trade relationships had been restored, colony missions had resumed, and the medical research programs had reopened their findings to all species. Regardless of political alignment, everything had returned to normal, or rather, everything appeared normal. But Don knew that nothing was truly the same. The galaxy had learned something about humanity that could not be unlearned. And humans had learned something about themselves that they would carry forward into every future interaction. They had proven that they could be pushed but not broken. They had demonstrated that their patience was a gift, not a given, and they had shown the galaxy what happened when that gift was finally withdrawn. Ambassador Yoon entered with her daily briefing, and she paused at the door. "Something amusing?" Don asked. "I was asked today how humans remain so calm in the face of provocation." Yoon said. "Then what did you tell them?" "I told them the truth," Yoon replied with a small smile. "I told them we are not calm, and we are simply very good at waiting." Chancellor Don nodded slowly. "And now the galaxy knows what happens when we stop waiting. Now they know, across the stars, in diplomatic chambers and military academies and ordinary homes. A new phrase had entered the common vocabulary of every species. Do not annoy the humans. Not because humans were violent, not because humans were aggressive, not because humans sought conflict or conquest or domination, but because human patience, once exhausted, did not return easily, and a galaxy that had grown accustomed to human cooperation was learning to be very, very careful about taking that cooperation for granted. The humans had gone back to smiling, but no one in the galaxy would ever forget what lay behind those smiles, and that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all. The Kovati High Command had expected human aggression after the destruction of the pirate station, and they had prepared accordingly. They mobilized 3 full battle fleets and positioned them along the border of human-controlled space. They issued statements condemning human military action and demanded reparations for the destruction of neutral territory. They expected the humans to escalate, to push forward, to give them the justification they needed for a full military response. Instead, the humans did something far worse. They not stopped fighting, because there had been no real fighting yet, but stopped everything human trade ships that had been completing their final contracts in Corvathi. Space finished their deliveries and simply left human engineers, who had been maintaining critical systems on Corvathi-aligned worlds, packed their tools and departed without explanation. Human entertainment networks went dark on Corvathi stations, leaving millions of citizens suddenly without their favorite shows and music. Human pharmaceutical companies announced that their latest treatments, including the only known cure for a disease affecting 3 Corvathi-aligned species, would not be available for purchase until further notice. None of it was illegal, none of it was aggressive, and all of it was devastating. High Hegemon Vrathel sat in his throne room and listened to reports that grew worse by the hour. The Thessians have withdrawn from our mutual defense pact, his advisor reported. They say they cannot afford to be associated with us while human trade is disrupted. Vrathel gripped the arms of his throne. The Thessians have been our allies for 2 centuries. The Thessians also import 60% of their medical supplies from human sources, the advisor said quietly. They have calculated that our alliance is not worth their citizens dying from preventable diseases. Another advisor stepped forward. The Vorn have demanded that we resolve this situation immediately, and they have implied that failure to do so will result in reconsidering their trade agreements with us. The Vorn do not make demands of the Corvathi. The Vorn also do not like being unable to access human entertainment networks, the advisor said with careful neutrality. Apparently, the latest season of something called Stars and Strangers was very popular among their youth. Vrathel felt rage building in his chest. Rage at the humans, at his allies, at the universe itself, for allowing soft creatures like humans to hold such power. We have the largest military in this sector, he said. We have the strongest economy, the most advanced technology, and the most disciplined population. His advisors said nothing. How is it possible that we are being brought low by a species that smiles at insults and apologizes for existing? Still silence. Answer me, the senior advisor, an elderly Corvathi who had served 3 hegemons, spoke carefully, because the humans were never smiling at the insults. Your supremacy, and they were smiling instead of responding to them, which is a very different thing. Explain. We assumed that human patience meant human acceptance. The advisor said, we were wrong, and their patience was simply the time they spent deciding whether we were worth the effort of destroying. And now they have decided that we are not worth destroying. The advisor said, they have decided instead to simply stop helping. And we are learning that we needed their help far more than we ever admitted on Harmony Prime. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for only the 3rd time in its 500 year. History Chancellor Don Hyjin of Earth entered the chamber, and her presence alone sent shockwaves through the assembled delegates. No human leader had ever attended the council in person. Human presidents and chancellors had always sent ambassadors, had always maintained a certain distance from galactic politics, had always seemed content to let others take the lead. Chancellor Dawn was a small woman with gray hair and a face that seemed designed for kindness, and she walked to the human delegation's position with the calm confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. Chancellor, Councillor Jis said, rising to acknowledge the historic moment. We are honored by your presence. I wish the circumstances were different, Chancellor Dawn replied, and her voice carried easily through the chamber's perfect acoustics. She remained standing as she addressed the full council, and her words were simple and direct. For 50 years, humanity has been a member of this galactic community, she said. For 50 years, we have contributed our technology, our art, our medical advances, and our labor to the common good. The chamber was absolutely silent. For 50 years, we have endured interference in our expansion, sabotage of our projects, and contempt from those who mistook our patience for weakness. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembled delegates. We did not complain because we believed in this community. She continued, we believed that cooperation was better than conflict, that patience would be rewarded with eventual fairness, that the galaxy would come to see us as partners rather than targets. We were wrong. The words hung in the air. 3 months ago, 207 human beings died on Research Station Evergreen, Chancellor Dawn said. They died because Korvathi bureaucrats chose to delay supply shipments as part of their ongoing campaign against human interests. We said nothing. We filed our protest through proper channels. We waited for justice, and instead, we watched a Korvathi representative mock our dead in this very chamber. She turned to face the Korvathi delegation directly, and Representative Threlvax shrank back from her gaze, despite being twice her size. We are not here to declare war, Chancellor Dawn said. War implies that we see you as a threat worth fighting. We are here to inform you that we are done. Done accepting insults, done tolerating interference, done pretending that your contempt for us is anything other than what it is. She produced a data chip and placed it on the podium before her. This contains documentation of 18 years of Korvathi actions against human interests. She said, 312 human deaths that can be traced directly to deliberate Korvathi interference, and 7 colony missions delayed or destroyed, and countless smaller incidents that were never reported because we believed silence was the path to peace. We were wrong about that too. We demand formal recognition of human territorial sovereignty without exception. She continued, we demand reparations for the families of every human who died because of Korvathi malice. And we demand a public acknowledgement from the Korvathi government of their responsibility for these deaths. These are not negotiations. These are requirements, and until they are met, humanity will continue to withdraw from all interactions with Korvathi-aligned entities. She stepped back from the podium. That is all I have to say. The chamber erupted into chaos as delegates shouted questions and demands and accusations. Chancellor Dawn ignored all of it and returned to her seat beside Ambassador Yunhai. Hegemon Vrathel watched the recording of the session from his throne room. And for the first time in his long reign, he felt truly uncertain. His military advisors assured him that they could defeat the humans in direct combat. His economic advisors warned him that the economy would collapse before any military victory could be achieved. His diplomatic advisors informed him that every ally they had was pressuring him to comply with the human demands, and in a quiet corner of the palace, Neshkai, a young officer who had been assigned to deliver impossible orders throughout this crisis, watched and listened and began to understand something. The humans had never been weak. They had simply been choosing not to be strong. And now that they had stopped choosing, the entire galaxy was learning just how terrible that strength could be, not through weapons or fleets or conquests, but through the simple, devastating power of refusal. The humans were refusing to participate, and without them, the galaxy was beginning to fall apart. The Vankar system had been a thorn in the side of civilized space for over 60 years. Located at the intersection of 3 major trade routes, the system's primary station served as home to pirates, smugglers, and criminals of every species who could afford the protection fees. Everyone knew the Korvathi secretly funded the station's defenses in exchange for the pirates, targeting their rivals. Everyone knew. And nobody had ever been able to prove it. And nobody had ever been willing to pay the price of removing the problem. Captain Beak Sun, who stood on the bridge of the destroyer, persistent and watched the station grow larger on his view screen. 12 other human warships held formation around him, a mix of destroyers and cruisers that represented a fraction of Third Fleet's true strength, scattered throughout the system. Observer ships from 12 different species watched and recorded everything. "Captain," his communications officer reported, "we are being hailed by the station. Put them through." A scarred face appeared on screen, belonging to a then pirate named Rel, who had built her reputation on raiding human shipping lanes. "Human vessel," she said with obvious amusement. "You are very far from home, and you are very outnumbered." Captain Beak looked at her steadily. "You have 40 minutes to evacuate your station," Rel laughed. And the sound was harsh and ugly. "Evacuate," she repeated. "Do you know how many ships have tried to take this station, human? And do you know how many have failed? 39 minutes. The Korvati Defense Fleet is 2 hours away." Rel continued, her amusement fading into contempt. "Even if you could damage our shields, which you cannot, they would destroy you before you could finish the job." Captain Beak said nothing. "Go home, little human," Rel sneered. "Go home and file your complaint with the council, and wait another 10 years for nothing to happen." 38 minutes, Captain Beak said, and he cut the transmission in the observer ships scattered throughout the system. Representatives from 12 species watched with varying degrees of interest. The Mallory observers communicated silently through their neural link, sharing calculations about human weapons capabilities and wondering if this was all an elaborate bluff. The Thessians clicked their mandibles nervously because they had extensive trade agreements with humans and did not want to see those agreements endangered by a failed military adventure. The Korvati observer ship reported everything back to the approaching defense fleet, and the commander there laughed at the idea of 13 human ships threatening the most fortified pirate station in the sector on the station. Rel returned to her command center and ordered her crews to battle stations, not because she was worried, but because she wanted to enjoy the moment when the humans realized their mistake. She had been raiding human ships for a decade, and she had learned that humans were soft targets who surrendered rather than fight. She had killed humans before, watched them beg for their lives, and felt nothing but contempt for a species that seemed incapable of real violence. Her weapons officer reported that shields were at full power and defense platforms were armed. "Good," Rel said. "Let the humans waste their ammunition, and then we will discuss how much they will pay for this insult." 20 minutes passed. The human ships held their position, weapons powered but not firing. Rel began to wonder if they were waiting for something, and she checked their sensors for any sign of additional forces arriving. Nothing. Just 13 ships facing a station that had withstood sieges from fleets 3 times their size. "Perhaps they have lost their nerve," her second officer suggested. "Perhaps," Rel agreed, but something nagged at her. Something about the way the human captain had spoken. No threats, no bluster, no demands, just a simple statement about evacuation and a countdown. 10 minutes remained on the humans' deadline. Rel noticed that a few of the smaller ships docked at her station were quietly departing, their crews apparently deciding that caution was preferable to curiosity. She let them go because cowards were not worth her attention. 5 minutes, the human ships began to move, spreading into a formation that Rel did not recognize from any tactical database. Her weapons officer reported that the humans were powering up systems that his instruments could not identify. "What do you mean, cannot identify?" Rel demanded. "They are not standard weapons," the officer said, and there was uncertainty in his voice now. "They are something else. Something new." 1 minute. Rel opened the channel to the human flagship. "This is your last chance to withdraw," she said, and some of the contempt had left her voice. "We have done nothing to provoke military action, and the council will condemn you for this aggression." Captain Beak's face appeared on her screen, and his expression had not changed since their first conversation. "Time is up," he said. Rel opened her mouth to respond. And then the universe turned white. What happened next would be analyzed and debated in military academies across the galaxy for generations. The human ships did not fire their standard weapons. Instead, they unleashed something that the observers struggled to comprehend. Coordinated energy beams that seemed to ignore conventional shields entirely. Kinetic rounds that accelerated to velocities that should have been impossible, and something else. Something that made the station's own power systems turn against it. The battle lasted 90 seconds when it ended. 6 kilometers of armored metal and state-of-the-art defensive systems had ceased to exist. Not damaged, not disabled, but simply gone. Reduced to a spreading cloud of debris that glittered in the light of the systems. The observer ships maintained absolute silence as they recorded the aftermath. Rel and her crew had vanished with their station because the 40 minutes they had been given was apparently considered sufficient warning. Captain Beak broadcast one final message, this time to the approaching Korvathi defense fleet. "We have no quarrel with you today," he said. "Please collect any survivors from the escape pods. And we recommend you arrive soon because life support in those pods is limited." The human ships powered down their weapons, reformed into standard formation, and jumped to faster than light speed before the Korvathi fleet was even close enough to engage. They left behind a cloud of debris and a handful of escape pods containing the few pirates who had chosen to heed the evacuation warning, and they left behind 12 species of observers who were frantically sending reports back to their governments about what they had just witnessed on the Mallory observer ship. Counselor Jis watched the recording for the third time and felt her worst fears confirmed. They were not bluffing. Her aide said unnecessarily. "No," Jis agreed. "They were not. How long have they had weapons like this?" "I do not know," Jis said. And that is perhaps the most terrifying part of all of this. She had studied humans for 50 years. She had read their history, learned their languages, observed their customs, and she had still underestimated them, not their technology or their military capability, but something more fundamental. She had underestimated their ability to wait. They had possessed these weapons for years, perhaps decades, and they had never used them. Not when pirates raided their ships. Not when the Korvathi blocked their expansion. Not when 200 of their people died on a research station because of bureaucratic malice. They had waited and waited and waited until someone finally pushed them past the point of patience. "Send a message to the Korvathi High Command," G said quietly. "Tell them that if they have any sense at all, they will find a way to end this before the humans decide that one demonstration is not enough." Her aide hurried to comply. Jis remained at her observation window, watching the debris field that had once been the most feared pirate station in the Vosges sector. The humans had called this a demonstration. She wondered what they would call it when they stopped demonstrating and started truly fighting. She hoped she would never find out. 3 weeks passed after Ambassador Yoon walked out of the Galactic Council chamber, and the galaxy began to notice something strange. The humans had gone quiet at first. Nobody paid much attention because humans were always doing peculiar things that made no sense to other species. But then the patterns started to emerge, and those who watched carefully began to feel the first stirrings of unease. Vensolari made her living selling information to anyone who could afford her prices, and she had built her reputation on knowing things before anyone else did. She was Dishan, which meant she had 6 legs and compound eyes that could spot a lie from across a room. And she had survived in her dangerous profession for 40 years by trusting her instincts. Her instincts were screaming at her now. The human diplomatic staff have canceled all non-essential engagements, she told her latest client, a Kovathi merchant who had paid a small fortune for this meeting. They attend mandatory council sessions and nothing else. The merchant clicked his teeth dismissively. Human sulking is hardly worth the price I paid. They are not sulking, Ven said. And something in her voice made the merchant pause. They are consolidating. She pulled up her data on the holographic display. Between them, human trade ships are completing their current routes and then returning to Earth-controlled space instead of taking new contracts, she continued. Human engineers working on joint projects with other species have submitted their resignations. Effective in 30 days, the merchant leaned forward now, his contempt replaced by the sharper attention of someone who sensed profit or danger. Their military channels have gone dark, Ven said. Full encryption, which they have not used since the Silence War 30 years ago. And their fleet positions are being quietly adjusted. Adjusted how? That information costs extra. The merchant paid. Because information was currency, and Ven Solari never bluffed about the value of what she sold. Third Fleet has moved to the edge of Kovathi border space, she said. Not in an aggressive posture, but in a ready one. And the difference between those two things is very small when humans are involved. On the Kovathi homeworld, a military strategist named Dockeran was having a very difficult day. He stood before the high command and tried to explain something that his superiors did not want to hear. We must de-escalate. Immediately, he said. His forearms pressed tight against his body in the posture of urgent submission. The humans are preparing for something, and we are not ready. General Vrathkal made a sound of disgust. Humans do not prepare for anything except more talking, he said. They will send another ambassador to apologize for their ambassador's rudeness, and everything will return to normal. With respect. General, I have studied human history extensively, and this is not normal human behavior. You waste your time studying prey animals. Dockeran felt frustration building in his chest, but kept his voice steady. Humans are not prey animals, he said. Their world tried to kill them constantly, and they killed it back, and when they ran out of external enemies, they turned on each other with weapons that could crack the crust of planets. The general waved a dismissive arm. Ancient history from a primitive species. They nearly destroyed themselves. Dockeran pressed on. Not once, but several times, and each time they came back stronger. And the only reason they stopped fighting was because they chose to, not because they lost the capacity for it. Your point? My point is that human patience is not weakness, Dockeran said. And he wished he could make them understand. It is a choice. And Representative Threl Vex may have finally pushed them past the point where they choose patience. General Vrathkal stood, ending the discussion. When the humans come begging for renewed trade agreements, we will be sure to consult your expertise, he said with heavy sarcasm. Until then, you are dismissed. Dockeran left the chamber knowing that he had failed, and wondering how many of his people would die because of that failure in the human diplomatic quarters on Harmony Prime. Ambassador Yoon hosted an unexpected visitor. Threlvex had come to offer what his species considered an apology, which meant acknowledging that perhaps his words had been poorly chosen while making clear that the sentiment behind them remained valid. He sat across from Yoon in a comfortable chair while she prepared tea with careful, practiced movements. Ambassador, he began. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding in our last session. Yoon poured the tea into 2 delicate cups that had been made on Earth 300 years ago. No misunderstanding, she said pleasantly. Your words were quite clear. I spoke from a position of cultural difference. Threlvax tried. My species values direct truth. And perhaps I failed to account for human sensitivity. Yoon smiled and set a cup before him. Please, she said. Try the tea. And it is a blend from a region of Earth called Korea. which is where my family originated. Threlvex took a sip because refusing would be a diplomatic insult. And he found the taste strange but not unpleasant. The weather on Earth has been unusual this season. Yoon continued. The cherry blossoms came early in Seoul, and my mother sent me images. Threlvex waited for her to address his apology. She did not. She spoke of weather and tea and the migration patterns of birds on Earth. And she asked polite questions about Korvathi, agricultural practices, and listened to his answers with apparent interest. An hour passed, and then another. At no point did she acknowledge his attempted apology or mention the incident at all. When Threlvex finally left, he realized that he had been more thoroughly dismissed than if she had thrown him from the room. And for the first time in his long career of manipulating humans, he felt something that might have been fear. Admiral Park Ji-hoon received Ambassador Yoon in his office aboard the carrier Indomitable, and he wasted no time on pleasantries. "Third Fleet is in position," he said. "We can respond to any scenario within 6 hours. And the others? First Fleet is holding at Earth as always. Second Fleet has quietly reinforced our colony defenses. And Fourth Fleet is conducting training exercises that happen to place them within striking distance of 3 major Korvathi trade routes." You nodded. "How long have you been preparing for this?" Admiral Park allowed himself a small smile. 6 years, he said. "Since the Korvathi started their interference campaign, we have been developing contingency plans. You expected this. I hoped it would not be necessary," the Admiral said. "But hope is not a strategy, and we learned long ago that the galaxy respects only strength." Yoon was quiet for a moment. "The Council thinks we are weak," she finally said. "The Council has never seen us truly angry." Admiral Park replied, "They have only seen us choosing not to be. And now we stop choosing. Across the galaxy, species who had long dismissed humans as soft diplomats began receiving reports that made no sense. Human shipping companies were raising their prices by 300% for routes that passed through. Korvathi Space, human medical researchers had placed indefinite holds on sharing their latest treatments. Treatments that a dozen species depended on human entertainment networks, the most popular in the galaxy, had stopped licensing their content to Korvathi-aligned stations. None of it was aggressive. None of it violated any treaties or agreements. But all of it together formed a picture that made the more observant species very nervous. Counselor Jis read every report and felt her dread growing with each one. She had lived long enough to recognize the signs of a species preparing for war, but this was different. And somehow that made it worse. The humans were not preparing for war. They were simply deciding to stop helping, and the galaxy was about to learn just how much it had come to depend on human goodwill. Ambassador Yoon Seoa sat in her designated chair at the Galactic Council chamber and kept her expression perfectly neutral as the Korvathi representative spoke for the 3rd hour straight. The chamber itself was a masterpiece of alien engineering. A vast dome of crystalline walls that shifted colors based on the emotional state of the majority present. And right now it glowed a soft blue that indicated boredom for most species in attendance. Yoon had grown used to these sessions over her 15 years as humanity's voice among the stars. And she had learned that patience was the greatest tool any diplomat could possess. "The human colony ships cannot pass through Sector 7, Threlvex announced, his forearms gesturing dramatically, as his species always did when they felt they were winning. "The regulations clearly state that any vessel carrying more than 10,000 passengers must submit to a full inspection period of no less than 90 standard days." This was the 18th time the Korvathi had blocked human expansion, using obscure rules that somehow never applied to anyone else. Yoon smiled softly and nodded. "We understand the concern for safety, Representative Threlvex. And we will of course comply with all necessary inspections. Behind her, Security Chief Kira Minjae stood motionless. But Yoon knew her well enough to sense the tension in her former military officer. And she made a small gesture with her left hand that meant patience. The other species watched this exchange with varying degrees of interest. The Mallory delegation, ancient beings who had seen empires rise and fall, observed with their enormous black eyes that reflected everything and revealed nothing. The Thesians clicked their mandibles in what passed for amusement among their kind. The Vorn simply ignored the proceedings entirely, as they found most carbon-based drama beneath their attention. Counselor Jess of the Mallory leaned forward slightly in her hovering chair, her aged face showing the wrinkles of 3 centuries of life. And she watched Ambassador Yoon with particular attention. Jess had made it her personal project to study humans ever since they had stumbled onto the galactic stage 50 years ago. And she had never quite figured them out. They were soft creatures from a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over. Yet they had survived and spread and somehow convinced themselves that the universe was a friendly place waiting to be explored. Other species found humans confusing at best and pathetic at worst. They smiled too much and apologized too often and seemed genuinely surprised when other civilizations acted in their own self-interest at the expense of others. The Kovathi had learned early that humans would bend rather than break, would negotiate rather than fight, would accept delays and insults and setbacks with that strange expression they called optimism. Threlvex had built his entire career on exploiting human patience. Furthermore, he continued, his voice carrying that tone of barely concealed contempt he reserved for humans. We must address the unfortunate incident at Research Station Evergreen. Yoon's smile flickered for just a moment, so brief that most species would not have noticed. But Counselor Jis noticed, and Security Chief Kira's hand moved 1 centimeter closer to her sidearm. Research Station Evergreen had been a joint human Mallory scientific outpost studying an unusual stellar phenomenon near the border of Kovathi space 3 months ago. A Kovathi bureaucratic hold on supply shipments had delayed critical equipment by 6 weeks. The station's life support systems had failed during that delay. 207 humans and 12 Mallory researchers had died waiting for supplies that sat in a Kovathi customs warehouse. The investigation had ruled it an unfortunate accident caused by unclear regulations, and the Kovathi had expressed their deepest sympathies while changing nothing about their procedures. Threlvex spread his forearms wide in a gesture his species used to indicate speaking difficult truths. The tragedy at Evergreen, while regrettable, demonstrates the dangers of human expansion beyond their capabilities, he said, and his lipless mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. Perhaps it is natural selection, removing those too weak to survive in our galaxy. The chamber fell absolutely silent. The crystalline walls flickered through several colors in rapid succession as the emotional state of the room became confused and uncertain. Counselor Jess felt something cold settle in her chest, a feeling she had not experienced in over a century, and it took her a moment to identify it as fear. Ambassador Yoon Seoha did something she had never done in 15 years of diplomatic service. She stopped smiling. Her face did not show anger or sadness or any of the emotions the other species might have expected, and instead it showed nothing at all. A perfect blank that was somehow more unsettling than any display of rage could have been. She stood slowly, and the movement drew every eye in the chamber. Kira Minja's hand fell away from her weapon because she recognized what was happening, and weapons would not be needed for what came next. Yoon gathered her documents with precise, unhurried movements, and she straightened them against the table with 2 sharp taps. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. She did not protest the insult to her dead colleagues. And she did not demand an apology or retraction. And she did not even look at Thrall Vex as she passed his delegation. She simply left Kira followed 3 steps behind, her face as blank as her ambassador's. The chamber remained silent for a long moment after the doors closed behind them. Thrall Vex made a sound of dismissal. "Humans," he said, "always so emotional. Always running away when faced with hard truths." A few of the younger delegates made sounds of agreement, but the older ones, the ones who had lived long enough to see patterns repeat across centuries, did not join in. Counselor Jis remained in her hovering chair long after the session ended, and she pulled up her personal archive of human history on her datapad. She had collected this information over 5 decades, and she had never been quite sure why she felt it was important. Now she understood. She scrolled through records of something humans called the World Wars, conflicts so devastating that they had nearly ended human civilization before it ever reached the stars. She read about weapons that could poison the air and water for generations. And she read about cities reduced to ash in single moments. And she read about a species that had stared into the void of self-destruction and simply refused to stop existing. And she read about human patience, not the weakness that other species assumed it to be, but something else entirely, something that looked like submission, until the moment it transformed into something that made Jiss's ancient hearts beat faster with dread. She sent a priority message to the Mallory homeworld, with a simple warning that she hoped her people would heed. "The humans have stopped smiling," she wrote. "Prepare for what comes next." In her quarters on the human diplomatic vessel, Ambassador Yoon Seoha stood at the window, looking out at the stars. Kira stood behind her. "Waiting, contact Admiral Park," Yoon said, and her voice was calm and steady and completely without warmth. "Tell him I need to know how long until Third Fleet can be repositioned." Kira nodded and turned to leave. "And Kira," Yoon added without turning from the window. "Yes, Ambassador. Get me the files on every human death that can be traced to Korvathi interference over the past 20 years. All of them. All of them." Kira allowed herself a small, cold smile as she left to carry out her orders. The galaxy had made a terrible mistake, and it did not even know it yet. Humans were indeed patient creatures who preferred peace and cooperation and mutual benefit. But patience was not unlimited, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when it finally ran out.